Hello, and welcome to this edition of CIBER Focus, your source for international business news. I'm Sara Reeves, and with us today is Thomas Reading, Professor of Business Administration at Ivy Tech. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Sarah. It's nice to be here.
Excellent. Well, we have you here today because you had an interesting experience this summer. So you got to travel to Scandinavia on a faculty development and international business program, and it was kind of focused on sustainability. So we brought you into the studio today in the hopes that we could talk to you a little bit about your experience.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be glad to share it.
Excellent. Well, before we get started on your particular trip, I thought we might start with the topic of sustainability. It's, I think, kind of nebulous and not everyone's quite sure what it means in a business context. So I was wondering if you could just share with us what you think sustainability means when we're talking about it in business.
Sustainability really goes back to the environment primarily, and it might be a 21st century word for conservation, and to use old words, reduce, reuse, recycle. So the objective is to reduce your footprint that you make on the environment in the course of your operations. So companies are doing a number of things, depending on the industry that they're in order to conserve resources, to use fewer resources, and maybe produce their own resources, perhaps in having solar energy and wind energy at their locations.
And so you were in Scandinavia in June on a trip that focused on sustainability.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the trip, the companies that you visited, and the things that they were doing along these sustainability measures?
Okay, the trip was about 12 days, and we started in Copenhagen, and we were there for about 8 days, and then after that we took the train to Gothenburg, Sweden, where we were there for 2 full days, and it started at the Copenhagen Business School with a 2-day conference, which was much more than our group, which was 18 people. There were about 100 people at the sustainability conference with people from around Europe, but also from North America. And on those first 2 days, we heard a number of people who are, fairly strong in their fields. One was Edward Freeman of the University of Virginia, and he is one of the major writers, from a theoretical standpoint about corporate social responsibility in general. And he wrote a major article that is in our textbook for the Business Ethics and Social Responsibility course.
Well, it was a nice opportunity to hear from him then.
Yeah, exactly. And another person who was there was Marianne Barner. She is with IKEA, the furniture retailer, and got involved in, this wasn't really sustainability, but got involved with child labor issues with IKEA procuring rugs from India. So that lasted for 2 days, and then after those 2 days, then we started visiting companies, and we visited Coloplast, which is a Danish company that's involved in personal health products. Then we also went to the Danish Fashion Institute.
Oh, that's probably fun.
And then the next day, we went to Maersk. Maersk is one of the largest shipping companies in the world. And they have done a lot to make shipping products more efficient, including developing an E3 container ship that will serve the Europe to Asia and Asia to Europe market in terms of shipping products from the producers to the consumers. And this ship is going to be more fuel efficient and faster, and be able to carry more containers than previous ships were able to do.
Well, even from a non-sustainability standpoint, that sounds good for business too.
Right. It's making things more efficient, and it helps them as well as the environment. So then I guess one of the fun places we went was Carlsberg, the brewer in Copenhagen. And Carlsberg is the fourth largest brewer in the world. They are not a factor so much in the U.S. market. They've never thought of trying to compete against Budweiser, Anheuser-Busch, and Coors and Miller. So they're not really a factor here, but Europe and Asia are their major markets, and they're very big in China and India. So, we went there and heard about how they consider themselves to be the most efficient brewer in terms of the use of water, which is big, of course, in the agricultural side. Growing barley, a lot of water is used, and of course then in the production of beer itself. And so that was very interesting. They have a museum adjacent to their brewery there, and we were able to walk around the museum and then sample a couple of their products.
Not a bad perk for the trip.
Right. Then we also went to a company called Novozymes, which is in enzyme production for dealing with various, conditions, diseases, and food as well. So that was another one of the interesting companies.
It's one of those things that you don't necessarily think about there being a company out there that's producing enzymes.
Mm-hmm. Right. Then after we left Copenhagen, we took the train to Gothenburg, and the two major companies we visited there were Volvo and Ericsson. And of course, Volvo is the automobile manufacturer and truck manufacturer. And we were actually visiting the truck side, but the automobile and truck businesses are right together. The automobile side of the business is now owned by a Chinese company. But the man who heads up their sustainability and corporate social responsibility has been involved in this for a few decades now. And of course, with automobiles, we're trying to, I guess, reduce weight, improve fuel efficiency, and use less resources that way. And, they've been a leader in that. And then Ericsson, very similar. They are now primarily involved in communications, telecommunications. They used to have a joint venture with Sony in cell phones, but they sold that, their part of that, to Sony. And now they're just involved in communications, and they're one of the largest setting up communications networks for companies. And
so, is there a particular reason you think that this trip focused on Scandinavia? Are they ahead of the curve, or is there more sustainability efforts in business there than, say, the United States?
I think so. I think Scandinavia is where there are companies, and over again we heard people say it's part of our heritage. Of based on where we live, the conditions that we have to deal with. And so we've always been in sort of a conservation mode.
Interesting.
And 3 of the top 5 companies on the World Sustainability Index are Scandinavian. So that's one reason why we were attracted. And they've also had people who have done a lot of writing more on the academic side about sustainability and what companies are doing and tying that into social responsibility overall.
And you mentioned corporate social responsibility several times while you were talking, and I think that sustainability efforts usually fall under that umbrella. Can you talk a little bit about what we mean by corporate social responsibility?
Okay, corporate social responsibility means that companies should take into account stakeholders who have a voice or an interest in what their company is doing. And generally that includes employees, customers, suppliers, the environment, and even investors are often included in that. And this has been expanded. Those are the ones that are always included, but it's been expanded to include other people such as NGOs, which you hear more over in Europe, but non-governmental organizations, which might include people interested in cancer or some other disease or some condition that exists in the environment or in the community. And the community is another stakeholder usually in corporate social responsibility. So all of those people and all of those groups are stakeholders in a company, and it's the belief that we should take those into account in decisions that we make. And you can go back in time to where, with respect to consumers, the book that Ralph Nader wrote, Unsafe at Any Speed, about the Chevrolet Corvair, which led to a lot of the safety features that we have on cars today. And Rachel Carson, who wrote Silent Spring, a book about the use of DDT and its impact on birds' eggs. And of course, then from the employee standpoint, the civil rights movement and the women's movement, which sought equal employment opportunity for everybody.
So there's a lot going on there. It's not just the environmental sustainability piece. There's a lot for companies to think about.
Exactly.
Did you think, so the purpose of these sorts of trips is for faculty to get the opportunity to travel and gather information and then possibly make use of it in their teaching, research, curriculum development, things like that. Did you see from this trip ways that you might be able to use the experience in your work?
Yes. I was interested in going on the trip in the first place because I was teaching a course called Business Ethics and Social Responsibility, which was put into the curriculum at Ivy Tech about 5 years ago. I guess partially in response to the financial crisis and so on. But I had been interested in teaching that course, and I was in fact teaching it during the previous academic year, starting in the fall of 2012. And we had classes in the fall and in the spring. And when I heard about this opportunity, I thought, well, this would certainly add to the course. So I'm now teaching the course this fall, and I brought into the class some of the information that I've gained from the trip, and
Very cool.
have talked about Carlsberg and IKEA and Maersk, and in addition to information that we received from the companies. And many of them publish a pretty complete corporate social responsibility and sustainability report, which is usually available on their website. I was able to, or have been able to, talk to the classes about things that these companies are actually doing to become more sustainable.
Do you get a response from the students? Are they finding this information interesting?
I think so. I think we can relate it to ourselves, our personal lives, and whether we personally want to be sustainable. In other words, be conscious of the environment and using less resources, or trying to be efficient in our use of resources, whether it's water or fuel for our cars or whatever.
Do you think the students will be able to take away from this experience when they go out into their careers later, that they might be able to look back on what they've learned from you through your trip and put it into action?
I think they can if they want to.
Yeah.
There's always a question about whether ethics can be taught.
That's really good.
And, you know, we've talked about that in class and discussed it in other courses before, but I think if people want to sort of adopt that, I won't say lifestyle, but if they want to be more efficient, if they want to be you know, more conscious about what resources they are using, and of course the companies that they're working for, the resources that in the organizations that they eventually go to work for, then I think they can use what has been in this course.
So before I wrap up, I wanted to ask if there was any particular anecdote from the trip. Was there anything that stood out to you, a story that you share with your students, or maybe one that you don't share with your students? Probably not.
Well, I talked about the Carlsberg visit, and in also IKEA, and a lot of people know IKEA, although there isn't an IKEA store really close to Bloomington. You have to go at least to Cincinnati to go to an IKEA store. But they are kind of unique, and after the trip, I went to Stockholm and went to an IKEA store there, and so this was right in the wake of the horse meat scandal with the Swedish meatballs, and
Did you brave the meatballs?
yes, I did. And for the summer, they had 3 different sizes of meatball orders that you could place in their company cafeterias. So it turned out to be a fairly inexpensive meal in a part of the world that tends to be fairly expensive.
Nice. So that was a deal for you.
Right.
And hopefully it wasn't horse meat.
Right. Hopefully not at a store in Stockholm.
Yeah. Well, is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you would like to share about your experience?
Well, I think it was very interesting to me because I've been in Germany. I made 4 trips to Germany. I had been in Helsinki. I had been in Tallinn in Estonia, and I kind of watched, you know, things that are going on wherever you go to visit. And I was interested in Scandinavia, I guess the rest of Scandinavia, in terms of both Denmark and Sweden. And I think that I met, you know, my objective in terms of learning a lot more about those 2 countries in addition to the other countries that I've been to.
Did you notice differences between the other countries, or is there kind of a general Scandinavian vibe?
There's something of a Scandinavian vibe. I think we were all impressed by the people are very friendly. The workplaces are very informal generally. People dress casually, and they seem to be able to communicate across all levels of their companies. They tend to be fairly flat organizations, and so I think it makes a good working atmosphere in a company setting.
It's interesting you mentioned the kind of casual dress. We had students on campus this summer from several Scandinavian countries, and they were very uncomfortable with our business professional dress requirements for some of the meetings that we took them on, that they said they felt silly to get so dressed up. So it's interesting that you were taking note that they were much more casual in their work environment.
Yes. Maersk was the only company where we were told ahead of time that you know, they tend to dress more business professional rather than business casual, or in some cases, really, you would call it casual.
Yeah, it's interesting to kind of note those small differences that people might not notice right away, but they can make a difference in the work environment or the culture and the way people interact. So
right,
it's interesting.
Yeah, and of course, you know, in Scandinavia, a lot more people ride bicycles or, of course, have very fuel efficient cars that that they drive to work, and for obviously for pleasure as well.
The general ethos, I guess, the sustainability thing is built into the culture.
I think so.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate you coming in and joining us today. I hope that you had as much fun as I did.
Yeah, I enjoyed coming in and sharing my experiences.
Excellent. That's it for this edition of Cyber Focus. If you have any suggestions or comments for future interviews, you can reach us at ciber@indiana.edu.